Hello everyone. How are y'all doing? Let me put on some music in the background. Let me know how the balance is between my voice and the music. Let's just wait until more people are joining the stream. Hello Topic Sentence. How's it going? Excellent, Big Dan. Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you here. I'm not sure if you were on my previous streams or not, but Trevor Humphreys, hey. So, look, guys, this is going to be what one is going to call a panic stream, okay? I literally, and this is going to be a lesson for me. I don't use the program Word, right, of Microsoft. I use Word Online, which is, well, just the online version of it, right? And guess what happened? You know, I've got all my notes for the topic today, and I go on, and I'd refresh the page, and look, it's gone. My notes are gone. It was like I don't know, 5 pages worth of notes totally disappeared. So, man, I don't know. I'll have to go off the cuff, and I mean the dates are going to be totally butchered. But what can you do? Oh, it's just sadness, really. Because today I was also planning to do a call-in stream, which I think I'm still planning to do. I mean, what I could do is, delay the topic of the schism, and just do a call-in stream today, and we can just talk about whatever. Or what I can do is kind of go off the cuff for a bit, maybe 15-20 minutes presentation from what I remember in the Western Schism, and then we can go on to the callers. I don't know what you guys want. Yeah, Big Dan. This is what I'm going to. This is where I'm going to learn my lesson, ultimately today. But I think I still want to go ahead. I think I still want to go ahead. Let's see. Let me just notify my Telegram that I'm indeed live. Delete the old post. So, I suppose let us, before we get into the Western Schism, just got the you got the notification. Excellent, Big Dan. Well, before we go on to discuss the Great Western Schism, let us discuss first of all, what do we need to know? What are the key players here in this conflict? Well, first of all, let's discuss just the idea of the papacy. What was it? According to the Catholic Church, it is the office instituted by Christ himself when he gave the keys to the kingdom of heaven to St. Peter. And later on he said, thy fail will fail not. And he also commanded him to feed the lamb, feed the sheep. And from this and others, and other reasons, biblical reasons like parallels to the Old Testament, and so on, that the Catholic Church derives this office of the papacy. And this is going to have a great impact on the papacy. As a result of this great schism, we're going to have two ideas that are going to be competing in the church, and ultimately also involve the Reformation and ultimately Vatican I. The two ideas are conciliarism and papal infallibility, or papal authority. So you will have people on one side effectively saying that church councils hold the ultimate authority insofar as church definition of church dogma and church hierarchy and authority goes, and that the Pope shouldn't really have absolute power within the church, and he shouldn't have secular power over the princes either. And obviously there are various degrees in that philosophy taken to various extremes. And then the papal side, who's going to be ultimately victorious in the end, after Vatican I, centuries later, is the side which invests the Pope with ultimate governing authority within the Church. And also there are strands within this movement which also provide the Pope or invest the Pope with power of a secular authority. So from their point of view, from the Papist point of view, the Pope is not only an authority within the Church, but also an authority within the secular realm. And that second idea, is ultimately what is going to be triumphant, as I said, centuries later in Vatican I, when the dogma of papal infallibility will be pronounced as divinely inspired, or divinely revealed, shall I say. So let us then look at the geography of Europe and just take a look at what kinds of things have happened or are happening right on the eve of the Great Western Schism. Now, this map right here, what we're seeing is Europe in the year 1378, and 1378 is the year in which officially, the schism begins. And just like with any war or any historical event, there are precursors, there are developments which point in the direction of the schism, and they point in the direction of a conflict. And here is no different. So what is happening? Europe has just come out, or it is still in the middle of the period of the Crusades, but it's just come out of the period of the First Crusades. And so this is, we're looking at the 14th century, as I said, 1378. And the Crusades begin in the 11th century. And so what has happened is that the Church during the period of the Crusades has amassed power such that the princes and the kings in Europe were effectively reduced to commanders within the army of the Church, effectively. You had, with the declaration of Pope Urban II, the calling for the Crusade at the end of the 11th century, many of the kings and secular rulers, the rulers of France, the rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, England, and so on, would later on declare that they will be joining the Crusades to retake the Holy Land. And as a result of the reforms at the time, and once again this powerful crusading movement, the papacy reaches probably the highest point of authority in church history. At this point, 2 centuries later, I mean, the crusading is still going on, as you can see on the map, right here at the bottom, where you've got the Iberian Peninsula. You've still got the Emirate of Granada, so Granada is yet to be reconquered by the Spanish. But what is happening is that the splendor and the authority and the prestige that the Church has received from the first successful crusade, the stories that people are hearing, the stories that people are telling each other, are beginning to wane. Those were very powerful stories when it came to the Second Crusade, the Third Crusade. In the coming centuries, there were very powerful stories, and in a sense they still are. However, that was waning, and so there have also been secular conflicts between the papacy and for example, the ruler of France, that would shake the authority of the Pope further. So, what is happening? What has just happened to Europe? What are we? What big event have we just witnessed going into this? What, the 100 Years' War, the war between the Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England over the crown. Obviously, this war was absolutely disastrous, and we're looking at a post-war Europe where the monasteries, the churches are not secure, where they're burnt down, where they're being destroyed, they're being pillaged and sacked, where the princes, in search for earthly power and in competition with each other, are bringing about using something I would call a mercenary culture. They're bringing about terror within Europe. So you have these mercenaries who are without fatherland, they're without allegiance their allegiance is owed insofar as they're paid. And whichever prince pays them more, that is the prince who has control of them. And they oftentimes just psychopathic people who really terrorize the very lands that even they were born in. Sometimes it's really waging war for money. So that's that. We have the culture of mercenaries. We also have this kind of post-war war atmosphere. What it breeds is a decadence moral and also lax discipline, right? Because if you have chaos everywhere, if you're not sure that the church or the monastery is going to stand, whether there's going to be a bishop there or a priest, someone from the church authority to effectively administer the monastery, administer the church, then it's going to be chaos. And we'll see how that is later on, and even during the war period, that is being exploited by effectively nepotism and favors. So what you have is but I'm kind of going ahead of myself. So before we go on to I go on to kind of explain the decadence within the papacy, what is happening within the church, why is the church breaking down, what is happening. That is going to begin with the explanation on what is the Avignon papacy, which is very important and very key in France. So I suppose I need to explain the office of the papacy further. I've already begun. But effectively, people see Rome, and now as Vatican, but Rome in general, as a place of where the Pope must reside, right? That's the natural. He's the Bishop of Rome, so he must reside in Rome, right? That makes sense. However, St. Peter's Basilica is not actually the most important church in Christendom. The most important, building, the most important church is the Lateran Church, where also in Rome, right next to the Colosseum, where in fact events of enormous importance take place, such as the Fourth Lateran Council. And if you've been looking at the Telegram, at my Telegram post, you will remember me quoting the Fourth Lateran Council and Innocent III, where he defines infallibly what it means to effectively what transubstantiation means. So there's this there are these debates, of course, and they're still ongoing, but Innocent III kind of put it out of the question, so to speak, within the church, where what we have is the transubstantiation, the idea that the bread turns substantially into the body of Christ, even though it may appear as though it's bread. So it has the essence, the substance of the body of Christ, but it may have the accidentals of bread. And that is ultimately that is church dogma on transubstantiation, which is of course key to the understanding the Eucharist. And once again, another thing that Innocent III has shown, and in fact we'll see that this idea, this dogma, is strengthened even further when we discuss Boniface VIII, is the idea that outside the church there is no salvation. So Innocent III has clearly put down that whoever doesn't hold on to the faith will perish, and there is no question about that. And in fact, now I would think is a good time to talk about what is the Avignon papacy, because that will also involve a further kind of dogma that just strengthens the idea that outside the church there is no salvation. But before moving on to the Avignon papacy, I'm just going to scroll through the chat and see what's up. Was the expansion of the HRE primarily due to the desire of conquest, or truly holy means? Well, the HRE, I mean, it depends on how far we're going to go, because this is the 14th century. The the Holy Roman Empire is really a kind of a loose union of states. It wasn't really a matter of, not that much a matter of conquest. It's a matter of more of a matter of a union rather than an enforced empire, so to speak, whereby multiple electors, multiple great princes within the Holy Roman Empire get to elect the current emperor. And there's always war. There's pretty much unstopping war between the actual duchies and principalities and bishoprics within the Holy Roman Empire. So it isn't. You can think of it as kind of a European. I like to think of it as kind of a predecessor of the European Union. Where you have. People are kind of freer than they would otherwise have been to travel. But it's kind of more of a democratic exercise. Yes, the emperor has an imperial army, but once again, all of the different dukes and all of the princes have their own armies and their own votes and their own powers within the empire. And of course, here we see the Duchy of Austria, who is going to later on, not just later on, but also now it is an important player where it is going to be to spawn the House of Habsburg, who are going to later on rule pretty much the majority of Europe. The majority of Europe would be under Habsburg rule. And obviously here we see the Kingdom of Hungary that will later on also join with Austria to become the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that is that empire in and of itself is also a very interesting study, insofar as how do we conduct politics in a multicultural society. I think if people do want to learn about how we kind of how we rule over people who are so different, I think the Austro-Hungarian Empire is a very good case study. Okay. Let's see. Obviously, this was before nations were really present, Big Dan in LA says. The Germanic influence, you could say, bonding smaller states together into larger unified groups. Did this threaten the HRE? I'm not sure that it threatened the HRE. I don't know if bonding... Oh, do you mean the Germanic states bonding threatening the HRE, or just states in general bonding threatening the HRE? But I wouldn't say that... It's an interesting question. I personally don't know. I would need to think about that, but it's possible. It's possible that as you know, the Germanic tribes and the Germanic duchies unite within the Holy Roman Empire, they become disproportionately powerful, and thus they kind of threaten the delicate balance of the political situation in the Holy Roman Empire. But let's take a look at actually what is happening then in between France and Italy. So what is the geography right now? We have the Kingdom of France, which looks kind of similar. It doesn't look that unusual to what we have now. And then we have Italy, looks very different. So what we have is the Kingdom of Naples, which is an independent kingdom in this point, even though it used to be under the Spanish or under the crown of Aragon. After a revolt, they became free. So at this point, they're independent. We have the Papal States, which are the direct secular temporal holdings of the Pope. So of course the Pope is the head of the whole church, but also he kind of runs his own country, and runs these small Italian provinces that together are called the Papal States. And then we have northern Italy, which is which is mostly comprised of these smaller republics. And I would have to remind you also that northern Italy, at this point, you can see this red line, right, going here along the Papal States and up. Well, that is the line of the Holy Roman Empire. So at this point, northern Italy is in fact a part of the Holy Roman Empire. Later on, they would break off, and over time, the kind of Germanic presence, the power of the Holy Roman Empire within northern Italy, such as, for example, Milan, is going to decrease severely, and that's what's going to lead to that ultimately. And the Germans won't really be interested that much in informing the peace, but that's once again going off the cuff. That's a totally different matter. But we can see how that's relevant here. Because obviously the empire is going to have its own allegiance in the Great Schism. Now, the Avignon papacy. This is the idea, not the idea, the decision to move the papal court and the conclave of cardinals, which are the higher-ranking clergymen who elect the pope, to move the court to France. And you can see here, Avignon. This is where this is going to be under the control of the French king. So this county of Provence, right here, is officially under the Roman Empire, or under the Holy Roman Empire, but only on paper, one could say. The influence of the emperor is waning in the county of Provence, and the influence that the King of France has on this territory is increasing. And therefore, when the Pope moves to Avignon, he is really under the influence not of the Holy Roman Emperor, but instead he's under the influence of the Kingdom of France and of the King of France. So what has led the papacy to move? We're talking 1309. 1309 is when the papacy moved to Avignon. Beforehand, it moved somewhere else in France, but ultimately it's going to the second move is going to be to Avignon, and is going to stay there for a while. So what happens? What happens to provoke the papacy to leave Rome and go to Avignon? Well, let's see. So we have the Pope at this point is going to be, we're going to be talking about Boniface VIII, who's on your screen, and King Philip IV of France. Now, what happens is the Italians, they have a dispute. Boniface VIII and King Philip IV of France, they have a dispute over temporal power. So the king wants more independence, more secular independence, and he wants a reduced authority of the Pope in secular matters. And that leads to, obviously, a conflict, and that leads to one of the bulls that Boniface VIII issues, which states that every human creature, it is necessary for salvation for every human creature to be under the direct authority of the Pope. And once again, that strengthens the idea that outside the church there is no salvation, once again, but also it has political consequences, of course. King Philip doesn't like that, of course, and what happens is the Italian supporters of King Philip IV, they rush into the papal palace and they beat up Boniface VIII. They beat him up severely. And as a result, of course, as a result, he will die very soon afterwards, and a new pope is going to be elected, Benedict XI, the Blessed Benedict XI, and what he's going to do is excommunicate all of those. First of all, excommunicate the King of France, Philip IV, for conspiring to assault the Pope in that manner, but also he's going to excommunicate the cardinals and everyone who's involved, the Italian bishops and the Italian co-conspirators. He's going to ultimately excommunicate them. He will die soon after his election, and Clement V is going to be elected as Pope, and he is a supporter of the king. So he ultimately is going to reverse that decision. He will rescind the excommunication of King Philip, and let's just say that the Romans are not happy that the Frenchman is now Pope. Clement V is a Frenchman, so they're not happy that Clement V is the Pope, and effectively for the purposes of his own safety, he's going to move the papacy to France, and he's going to move the papacy ultimately in 1309 to Avignon. So this is so to sum up, the movement of the papacy from Avignon, from Rome to Avignon, ultimately happens because of the unstable political situation within Italy, within the Papal States. The Clement V feels threatened, and therefore he decides to move court to France. Let's see. Let me just quickly check the chat. Let me check that we're still going live and well. Okay, seems like we're fine. So let's talk about now specifically. So we've talked about the Avignon papacy. Why did we talk about it? Why is it important? It has multiple political consequences for Europe. The Pope being a close, let's just say, associate of France, of the King of France, makes everyone else effectively unhappy and reduces the authority that the papacy holds within Europe. Why is that the reason? Well, the Pope goes from, or the leaders of Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of England, they go from viewing the Pope as a universal figure, as a neutral figure, to him being somehow under the Kingdom of France. They feel like he almost becomes like a court chaplain to the Kingdom of France. That is, of course, why they are interested. They're not interested in continuing the Avignon papacy, in theory, and they would be interested in, once again, seeing the Pope return to Rome and rule neutrally, as he had, without the influence of the Kingdom of France. Another result of the Avignon papacy is that the papacy becomes more like let's just say, the popes become more like princes, and the papal court becomes more like a royal court. So things like, you would see things like justice, decadence, abundance of riches, lax discipline, all of that kind of through the papacy moving to Avignon, through the royal influence of the Kingdom of France, there is this decadence within the papacy which further weakens its status in Europe. So the movement to Avignon is important because it weakens the papacy politically, and it introduces more corruption within the papacy, which further reduces the reputation of the Pope. And so what we have is a Europe as a church where the Pope and the Church is in disrepute, and that also that moral decadence kind of comes from the general feeling of moral decadence and lax morals comes from these warring nobles, these mercenaries, the consequence of the 100 Years' War. So it's really a time of crisis. Now we're going to look at specifically what people are going to arise to, in terms of theology, to counter that. So as a result of this weakness within the church, multiple characters appear that are really kind of maybe not proto-Protestant characters, but they are certainly beginning to feel like reform is needed, and they are the theologians. They see themselves as the theologians who want to bring about this reform. So the important people here that challenge, for example, the secular authority of the Pope is John of Paris and Marsilius of Padua. So they they are key in the development of this idea of conciliarism, which we already talked about at the very beginning, where a general council has more power than the papacy, where the church actually, where it does derive its power, is from the whole body of the faithful and them coming together in a council to decide on a matter of dogma. That's where the ultimate power lies, not within the chair of St. Peter, not within the Pope's jurisdiction. So these are the ideas that these two men bring to the table. Now, Marsilius of Padua is very influential, and obviously what I've given is kind of most relevant to what we're talking about, but he is really one of the fathers of Machiavellianism, and he really is the father, you can say the father of the modern notion of democracy, the modern notion of the nation state, the modern notion of separation of church and state. He thinks about it, he writes about it, he's a very influential figure in that sense at this time. And John of Paris, actually, this is, you can't see the full image here, but effectively he comes to, I believe, Innocent III and asks, because he has different ideas on transubstantiation, so he will ask pardon he has to ask pardon of Innocent III. And he similarly plays into a similar understanding of challenging the authority of the papacy as an institution. Now we have the English side, which is who are the William of Ockham, after whom the Ockham's razor is called, and John Wycliffe. Now William of Ockham is a very important theologian, and he really is the one that kind of sets the ground for John Wycliffe in kind of this English proto-Protestant movement. And what they are doing is challenging not just the authority of the Pope, but specifically this union of church and state, a political philosophical structure that is often referred to as the throne and altar. So you have society resting on two pillars, on two columns. One is the throne, which is the secular authority of the king, and the other is the altar, which is the divine authority of the church, and they feed off of each other. So, of course, where does the king get his authority? He gets his authority from God. How does the church enforce morality onto people? Well, it does it via the secular leaders. So this is really the medieval, classic kind of medieval understanding of the marriage between church and state. Now, on the other side of the coin, so those I would say, John of Paris, Marsilius of Padua, William of Ockham, John Wycliffe, these would be the revolutionaries. These would be the proto-Protestants who ultimately want to weaken the papacy. On the opposite side, and just as erroneous in my view, are the people who I would call the reactionaries. And the reactionaries basically say, actually, no, the Pope doesn't just occupy this important standing within the church as we've understood it for such a long time. In fact, he has even more power than you think. He should have ultimate authority, ultimate secular authority on earth, just as much as he does have ultimate divine authority. And two people who propagate this idea would be the Augustinus Triumphus and Alvaro Pelagio. And also what's important to understand is Marsilius of Padua, he is a rector of the University of Paris, and the University of Paris is going to be an important institution that is going to challenge Rome. And that is where he ultimately teaches, and that is going to be kind of the epicenter of kind of anti-papal thought, if you will. Now, from the side of the non-theologians. We have those who are crying out for reform. So who is it in the kind of layman realm, in the civilian realm, that are crying out for reform? It's St. Catherine of Siena, who plays actually a direct role in the events, which we'll later discover. And of course, it's poets, and the most important of which is Dante Alighieri, who single-handedly kind of creates the Italian language, you can say. It's enough to read Dante's Inferno to see the criticisms that he holds against the church. So St. Catherine of Siena, Dante Alighieri, just one of the big characters who are pushing, who are asking the church, they're not particularly saying what the church needs to do, but they're crying out something needs to be done to deal with the decadence. Let's see once again. Let me quickly check the chat. So far, do people have any questions so far? Whilst I take this break, have a bit of water. Topic sentence asks, does the papacy have to be based in Rome? No. As I've described, it doesn't have to be. Yes, the Pope is a bishop of Rome, but he mustn't. There isn't kind of an obligation for him to ultimately reside in some building in Rome, shall we say. More exploration of the political situation that follows and kind of develops during the Avignon papacy. Of course, we talked about the court of the papacy. We talked about what other countries are thinking about this move of the Avignon papacy. What does Italy think? What do you think the papal states think as a result? What happens within the papal states? What do the people think as a result of the Pope moving and of the Pope ceasing to be Italian? Well, they really dislike it, obviously, because as I said, the Pope isn't just he isn't just an authority, a church authority, but he's also the ruler, the secular ruler, of, you can say, the king of the papal state, right? So when he leaves, within the papal states, what you can describe, they go into frenzy, riot, and chaos. So, and that chaos, as you can imagine, doesn't really leads to the popes in Avignon not really wanting to come back. Why would you come back when there is such chaos and backstabbing and destruction and riot in Rome, right? It doesn't make any sense for them to kind of come back. So that's how they. So that's the reason why they ultimately kind of stay in Avignon. And ultimately they stay in Avignon until 1376. So that so we're talking about the movement to Avignon is in 1309, and in 1376 the papacy under Benedict the 11th. Let me just check that. So I know for sure. Gregory the 11th, apologies. Under Gregory the 11th, finally decides to move the papacy back to the Papal States. And why does he decide to do that? It's a very interesting story, because that is where Catherine of Siena comes in. Catherine of Siena. She comes in. She is at that time very young, and so she kind of breaks into. She kind of already breaks a very important point straight away, where she's a young girl, and she's granted audience, and she effectively says, look, Pope, you need to come back. You need to come back. She's kind of this, you can say, prototype of Joan of Arc, right? She ultimately, a young girl, persuades Gregory XI to come back from Avignon to the Papal States. And when he comes back in 1377, he kind of comes back. He travels through the pacified regions of the Papal States, ultimately back to Rome, and this is seen as a kind of a moment where, well, finally the Pope is back in Rome, and it seems like he's not going to leave. His stance was, I'm not going to leave Rome anymore. We have moved the papal court back to Rome, and we're not leaving anymore. So now it seems like the political situation is going to stabilize. The church, the situation within the church is going to stabilize, because, of course, that reform that people are crying for, that Dante's crying for, that St. Catherine is crying for, that reform ultimately cannot be effectively administered whilst the papacy resides in Avignon, for obvious reasons. So the move of Gregory XI back to Rome signifies this fresh beginning. Finally, the Pope is back, and this crisis is finally going to be solved. The political crisis in Italy is finally going to be solved, and the church can finally start to bring about reform within the church. And unfortunately, as people were confident, people were kind of happy with the situation, more or less, but they couldn't have known what was coming, because just next year in 1378, a couple of months later, you're going to have the Great Western Schism, what is now called the Great Western Schism, begin, where the whole of Europe is split between a pope and an anti-pope, between two claimants to the papacy. And so when Gregory XI dies, what happens is he understands the delicate situation. He understands what's going on. And so he wants to leave the church in such a situation. He wants to prepare his departure in such a way that the election that follows, the papal election that follows, is going to be the most stable, and it's not going to result in rupture or in any kind of political dismay. So he tries his best. He dies, and the Romans, of course, they, as we know, for the last 70 years, almost, the popes have been French. And Romans are becoming angry, and they're becoming kind of borderline riotous, and they want to see a Roman pope elected. Now, the vast majority of the cardinals at this point are actually French, because once again, they were residing in France for a long time. So at this point, a lot of the popes nationally are French, because they've been appointed whilst the pope was residing in France. The Italian popes are in a minority. So 16 cardinals are going to take place, are going to take part in this election. 16 cardinals. I believe, let's see, 7 of them are Frenchmen. 4 of them are directly were directly appointed by the Avignon popes, so they would be kind of Avignon loyalists. But we must understand that just because, they're also French, that doesn't necessarily mean that the French and the kind of Avignon camp see eye to eye. They do not. In fact, the French camp really doesn't want to give kind of one of these Avignon cardinals or any of their bishops the office of pope. And then the 3 cardinals or 4 cardinals are from Italy. And so obviously the Italian cardinals are in a minority. And what you have is the conclave 1378 in April, it begins, and people are borderline riotous, as I said. And ultimately, this leads into 2 elections. And at this point, this is not schismatic. As we'll see, the result of this conclave is actually the election of a legitimate pope. What happens? Well, and here we'll see the 2 claimants that will later on arise. Let me change the slide here. So, what happens? They gather together for a conclave, and this is where the controversy begins. For a long time in history, in kind of historians were looking at this period, and they were saying that in fact the cardinals, due to them being pressured by the Roman mob, elected an Italian, who would later on be called, as you see, Urban VI. Actually, the historians later on of the 19th century, they discover documents, they gain more historical clarity on the matter, and they see actually that the election of Urban VI probably was valid. Why is that? Well, there is the kind of the huge riots don't really take place, and when we see the documents that relate to us what the cardinals themselves within the conclave were talking about, we see that in fact from the very beginning they meant to, and even the counterclaimant, who would later on be Clement VII, the counterclaimant was the first one to pledge support to Bartholomew, who would later on become Urban VI. So this new pope, Urban VI, is elected almost unanimously. 15, I believe, out of the 16 cardinals elect him, so almost unanimous election. In fact, later on, they come back the next day, and they have a second vote, and once again, he's re-elected. So in fact, they have 2 elections, which lead us to believe that probably Urban VI was the pope, as opposed to an anti-pope. Although the church never really declared on this matter, nor probably should, but that's a different matter. So Urban the Sixth is elected. Everybody recognizes him in the coming months after the election. He's crowned. He's elected. All the secular leaders recognize him. There is no resistance. Obviously, the Italian states are more or less pacified because of the election of the Italian. And who is that Italian? Well, he's in fact not one of the cardinals. He's an Italian bishop, and he is known for. He's known for his monasticism. He's known as a reliable man. He's not known as a man of excess, or as a decadent, or as a corrupt man. He has a very good. What do you call it? I just want to see his name exactly. Bartolomeo Prignano. There we go. So he's elected. And there's no question about who's the legitimate pope. So, why is it then that later on we're going to have this schism? Why is it that the same cardinals almost unanimously are going to vote the other direction? What is going to happen? Well, when he becomes pope, what happens is he kind of lets loose his temper. He's very wrathful. He insults people. He insults cardinals. He insults princes. He insults the kings. So he's not a very kind man. He is tyrannical. He forces the cardinals to sell off everything they have and help people out materially. To kind of donate everything they have, which, some people would say that is the correct thing to do. But let's just say that angered the and angered the cardinals greatly. Now, I just want to take a look at. I was looking him up because I don't remember, obviously because I lost my notes. I don't remember what he was a bishop of. Let's just see. Let me just quickly check. Yes, Archbishop of Bari. There we go. He was the Archbishop of Bari in Italy, in Apulia. So, there you go, Archbishop of Bari. He was well known, and once again, well regarded. But his temper doesn't really serve him well, as I've said already. So what happens is, months later, the cardinals, one by one, they gather together. They conspire to elect a new pope. Now, what pushed them to do it? What pushed them to kind of take this extreme action? Why were they not afraid? Well, they were confident. Because they had kind of let's just say, a secret, not a pact, but a secret patronage from, let's say, the King of France at the time. So the King of France was very much sympathetic to the counterclaimant, and he was sympathetic to try to bring about the scenario where the papacy returns back to Avignon, returns back under the authority of the Pope, and instead of having this Italian be elected, let's say. So what they do is they kind of instigate this disinformation campaign. They send out envoys, they send out emissaries all over Europe to try to convince that the election that they've all signed off on was in fact an illegitimate election, and now in the city, once again, don't have my notes, but I believe it was in Pavia, here in the city of Pavia next to Milan, they've elected a man who is called Robert of Geneva, who is actually a relative of, I believe, a cousin of the King of France at the time, and so you would see why he would be supportive of his cousin, of his relative. So they elect Robert of Geneva to become Clement VII. And from there on, once again, they launched a disinformation campaign across the entirety of Europe to try to convince everyone that Urban VI was not elected legitimately, and that in fact Clement VII is the legitimate successor to the throne of St. Peter. So what are the consequences ultimately? And this is going to be kind of the last the last part of the intro. I want to see, now that the Clement VII has been elected as a counter pope to Urban VI, what is the geographic situation? What is the political situation? How's it going to develop as a result? How are all the different countries going to align themselves? Yes? Here we go. So, obviously the Kingdom of France is very much interested, and by the way, Clement VII runs off obviously to Avignon. He feels like he spends a bit of time in Italy in order to spread his disinformation campaign, shall we say, but he ultimately runs off to Avignon. So, we have Clement VII, let's see. Oh, trying to draw here. So within Avignon resides Clement VII. Within Rome resides Pope Urban VI. And so what is the geography? What is the political situation? Well, the Kingdom of France, of course, is on the side of Clement VII. Naturally, as we've discussed already. The Kingdom of England is going to take the side of the Roman pontiff. Why is that the case? Well, because, of the Roman claimant to the pontiff. The Clement would have called himself the Roman pontiff as well, but no matter. Why is that the case? Well, because obviously there is a rivalry between the Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England. So naturally, politically speaking, they would take side with the Roman Pope. Also, the reason being is that the disinformation campaign that the faction of Clement would send out, not much of it got to the Kingdom of England, and those emissaries that got to the Kingdom of England, they weren't really believed. And why is that? Because they were Frenchmen, once again. So the disinformation campaign does not work in England. It has a natural rivalry with the Kingdom of France, therefore it's going to associate itself with the Roman Pope. And the Holy Roman Empire, very important, of course, is going to, on and off, but is going to assign itself to the camp of Urban the Sixth. Now, when it comes to Spain, the Crown of Castile, the Kingdom of Portugal, they will mostly be Portugal is going to side with Clement. Why is that? Well, because Kingdom of France at this time has this kind of fame for its orthodoxy. It is known for its orthodoxy. It's known that France is a good Catholic state, and that the French king is a good Catholic king. And so therefore, Kingdom of Portugal on that basis, and obviously there are different factors here, but also going to align itself with the Kingdom of France. The Crown of Castile, of course, also is going to align itself with Clement. Why is that? The reason is that there is also some disagreement between England and Castile at this point. So once again, they're natural enemies of England, and therefore they will take the side of Clement. Moving up a bit, Kingdom of Scotland, obviously as a natural, once again, as a natural adversary of England, is going to take side of Clement. And Ireland, for the most part, is going to remain loyal to Urban VI. And not that relevant to our discussion, but needless to say that Hungary and Poland, the states to the east, are going to align themselves with Rome. The Kingdom of Naples is the last that we should probably talk about, and that is going to align itself to Clement. The reason is that the rulers at this time in the Kingdom of Naples, they have a beef with the Pope. Simple as that. They have the beef with the Papal States. It's a matter of realpolitik at this point. It's a matter of personal politics. So they're going to align themselves with Clement. So, as a recap, we have Urban VI, supported by mostly the Holy Roman Empire, England, Ireland, states to the east, and then Clement has a large support of Kingdom of France, naturally, and then those who align themselves with France in opposition to England. And so this is kind of the situation that I wanted to, I suppose, end on. And probably start either with the colon section, or I'll obviously, take a look at the chat. But ultimately, I want to... and by the way, guys, I'm just going to go grab myself some more water because I've run out. If you have any more questions, obviously, forgive me for it not being so structured, and maybe I babbled a bit because I literally lost my notes. So I was just going off... what I remembered. So the dates, kind of holistically, looking. Obviously, I know what's happening, but like the dates, the dates are a bit wobbly. But the important dates, let me just drop them down. The movement, original movement of the papacy to Avignon, 1309. The election of Pope Urban VI, 1378. The obviously the election of Clement VII is also 1378. The move back from Avignon to Rome, that is under Gregory the 11th, and so he's going to move back in 1376. So this is the political situation. You can see how Europe is torn asunder. No longer is there unity in Christendom. No longer are they united by the Crusades. No longer are they united by this kind of independent, strong authority of the papacy. The papacy has been split in two from their theological debates are just exasperated. This kind of platform. This will serve as a platform for theological debate. I've already talked about the reactionaries, the revolutionaries. They are all going to very much take part in this conflict, and this conflict was kind of brought about in part by, as we've discussed, this growing strife for church reform as a result of kind of the horrors of the war and the decline of the office of the papacy. So if you guys drop down any questions, if you have them in the chat on what we've just talked about, on the this introduction on the Great Western Schism, if you have any, and then we'll continue with the call-ins. So I'll just post a link to StreamYard, and people will jump on and we can talk about this, we can talk about something else, it doesn't matter. Whatever you'd want to talk about, we can. So I'll just go grab myself some water. Let's just do maybe a 2-minute break, and then I'll be right back. All right, everyone, I'm back. So, whilst I'm responding to the questions that you've put in the chat, would you guys like to kind of rate whether you've enjoyed the presentation? And I do apologize once again for losing my notes, so I had to like look up the dates, which is just like, well, some of the dates, but it was rough. That's how I will get word, and I will I will not trust online kind of based editors anymore. So do you guys want to drop in the comments or in the chat whether you've enjoyed the presentation or not? No, Big Dan in LA. Oh, sorry. Trevor says, "What is your position on the Guelphs?" Well, I don't have a kind of an involved opinion on them, but I obviously, as I have a strong bias towards the papacy, I would have a strong bias towards them as well. Scary Sizzle, hey, how are you? Big Dan in LA. Do you see the schism keeping the people out of the church, the infighting, politics, adding unnecessary drama to the church, which does not lead people to God but possibly drives them away? Yes, of course. Well, yeah, schism ultimately, and this is something I think we have to mention about the Great Western Schism. People had no idea. It's not just that the rulers didn't have any idea what was happening, really. Imagine you were just sitting there on your throne, right? There's no like Twitter, WhatsApp, there are no videos, nothing. It's like someone comes to you, an emissary comes to you, the Pope is illegitimate, tells you the Pope is illegitimate, there is a new Pope. It just sows chaos everywhere. You're not sure of what to think. And likewise, the laity, the people within these territories, are going to be torn apart. And let's remember, this isn't so clear cut. When I put down the all the letters on all the different countries, every single one of these countries would have a group that would support the other pope also. It is not as clear cut. It's not like everyone in the Holy Roman Empire supported Urban, for example. And it's not that in Portugal everyone supported Clement. People were very divided in the whole of Europe on this issue. And it's not just the laity, the bishops were divided, the clergy was divided. Urban VI obviously excommunicated Clement VII, and obviously the other excommunicated him back. And whenever there would need to be filled an office of a bishop, let's just say, they would obviously exerting their own authority, their respective authorities, they would try to appoint they would try to appoint their own men to that office. So at sometimes there would be two church officials for one territory. So it was just chaos, and people ultimately, the atmosphere was such that people didn't think it's possible to fix the situation. And that's the reality of it. And I think today we have a very similar situation. And I think that, and but going back to your question, Big Dan, it directly involves the people. It directly lowers the church, its authority. It sows theological chaos, sows division within the church. It's not good. It's not good. But what I can say in defense is that the church surviving this schism and coming back together under Martin V, but that's way in the future, upon the resolution of the conflict, shows you, I think, the resiliency of the church, and it shows you that indeed, no matter how bleak the situation is, we can get back effectively. Big Dan in LA says, I see this today within the Christian church as a whole. Yep. So many doctrines that drive people apart instead of bringing them together, unified at the center by Christ. Yes, I agree. Although we will probably have a difference of opinion. I don't know, Big Dan, if you're a Protestant or not, but obviously I see unity in the church as unity under the Pope. So, but in general, yes, schism is is terrible, not just for these political games, but it's ultimately and most importantly undermines the church. Leonardo de Moraes, sorry if I butchered that. Leonardo, I think you're a new viewer, aren't you? If so, welcome. I don't remember talking to you beforehand. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining. The preference for urban climate was pretty divided in Portugal, was it not? Yes. So this is kind of the initial map. Straight after Clement returned and kind of the dust settled. And from the very beginning, I believe Portugal was in favor of Clement, but it would flip-flop. It would definitely flip-flop. Even the Holy Roman Empire, sometimes their kind of backing of Urban would wane, but this is just kind of plus or minus. This is plus or minus. Big Dan in LA. If you're on Mac, OpenOffice works for me. Yep, cool. Alrighty, guys. So I've seen a couple of you reacted to the Telegram post with the clap, as I've asked, and want to jump on. So I'm just going to post, and people who are in the chat can also jump onto the call. Let me create a StreamYard. Let me create a StreamYard room. Then we can let people in. Okay. Here's the link. Posted the link in the chat, guys. Just join the room, and we can have a discussion about this or about any other topic. I think it should work. This is the first time I'm setting up a room, so be patient if just clicking on it, doesn't work. If you jump in, I'll kind of bring you on, and we can talk. But yeah, in the meantime, this is a really important and critical period in church history. Today there are people who, even within the Catholic Church, I'm not even talking about the Protestant Catholic divide. I'm talking about within the Catholic Church. There is great disunity, and it would seem like the vast majority of Catholics, of course, go on with this. We go on with Francis and everything that's happened since Vatican II, but a lot of people, in some way, shape, or form, are opposed to that, and I just don't see that. That church, that counterfeit church under Francis, is going to survive, because they're not having enough priests, as I've said in the previous broadcast. They're not getting enough vocations. Laity is leaving. Like, churches are basically being emptied. Nobody goes to the church anymore. Catholics don't actually believe things that are Catholic, so they don't believe in that abortion is wrong. You know, they don't believe in that homosexuality is wrong. So it's really sad to see this kind of schism within the church as well. And here we go. Dan wants to join. So here you go, Dan. You're on the air. When you're ready, just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hey, Thomas. How are you?
Hey, Dan. How are you? Good to hear you. Can you hear me, Dan?
Sorry about that. I was I thought this was kind of like some of the other chats. Sorry about that. I was I thought this was kind of like some of the other chats. Sorry about that. I was I thought this was kind of.
Hold on. There is some kind of an echo going on here. I don't know why. Do you have the stream on as well? Echo going on here. I don't know why.
I'm not sure if it's.
Do you have the stream on as well? Echo going on here. I don't know why. Hold on, Dan. Echo going on here. I don't know why. Hold on, Dan. Echo going on here. I don't know why. Hold on, Dan. All right, hold on, guys. Something crazy is happening right now. I'm just gonna try to fix this. I don't know why, Dan, but when I turn you on, I can like hear yourself. I mean, I can hear myself coming from your side as well. I don't know if that's like my problem or if that's you. Does anybody else want to try to join the chat and see if if it works? Let me see. Let me call you maybe on Telegram, Dan, and see if it's going to work that way. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Thomas, you there?
Hey, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hello, Dan? Yeah, I can hear you. I'm just muting the YouTube stream. So.
Okay. Let's see. Hold on. We've got.
No, I think was we both taking part in the.
All right, guys. Well. The whole colon section is a bit of is becoming a bit of a disaster, guys. Which is obviously to be expected. All right, Dan. All right, tell me it's all good now. It's probably on my side. I'm doing something wrong here, but
The devil is against us.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, it seems to be working now. Let me know, guys, if you can hear Dan. Well, let me just mute the music in the background, and then we'll continue on. See, we're making the mistakes now, so that later on, for all the other streams, we can just have normality. Clearly.
I know some people have on other Telegram calls that I've been on have said that my volume is low, so I'm not sure if it's.
I've increased the volume, so you should be much better now. So.
Is that better?
Yeah. Well, I can
sound?
hear you. I can kind of hear you well enough. I'm just going to turn you more for the stream, so it should be fine. Let's see.
Okay.
All right. So, what do you want to talk about? Did you have a question on the on what we've been talking about, and just in general?
Well, my question actually ties in with kind of your historical synopsis that you've been going
Yes.
over in the last hour or so. Um, and because my background is not as a Catholic,
Yes.
I've been raised in a more evangelical Protestant background.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, still very much Christian, but I'm free of a denomination, you could say, at this point in time. So while I've certainly been opened up to the Catholic Church through reading of E. Michael Jones and
Yes.
listening to yourself, and then listening to Bishop Williamson and things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm still not settled, you could say, on a particular doctrine.
Yes.
I want to make sure that there's nothing coming between me and Christ, earthly doctrine coming between me and Christ in a
Mm-hmm.
direct relationship with Him. So
Yep.
for me, I understand that there's, the earthly realm can sometimes add complexity, and I try and remove the complexity because I don't believe their relationship with Christ is a complex one at its base level. Uh, and I think for myself, I've found that it's easier to stay in that relationship with Christ when you strip away the excess. Um, that's just my own personal take on it. So removing the fluff, I guess you could say, of all of this and that and this and that, and this was said by this guy and this was said by this guy, and I'm like, well, what does the Bible say? And I know that the Catholics have um, you could say extra biblical or a larger size Bible. Am I correct in saying that? You guys have a few more books in the Catholic Bible?
Well, I suppose from your perspective we have more books, but from our perspective, you have fewer books.
Oh, okay. Well, I think for the purpose of
Yeah.
purpose of this discussion, we can both lay our swords on
Of
the
course.
table,
Yeah. Of course.
and have a happy discussion over a cup of tea. But
Excellent.
because I don't look at it as necessarily we have more books or less.
Yeah.
I've always had the mindset of, well, we have you could say the 66 books of the Protestant side, or more books in the Catholic side, possibly more with the Orthodox side as well. Um, and I've said, well, how do we know? I mean, that was still a compilation put together by men. And some people say, well, it was ordained by God or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, how do we know that there's not things that are still buried somewhere in the desert to be discovered?
Mm-hmm.
Extra texts. Um, and so for me, you could say I'm still open minded to exploring these things, but I know that there's been a lot of infighting, and that's why I commented in the uh, in the chat about the infighting and how I see that, especially you could say within even politics today, more conservative right wing circles, there's still a lot of infighting, and I don't believe that the infighting is productive long term. Um, there's people who could be more libertarian or more live and let live, but they still kind of align with conservatives. But then there's those of us that might be more conservative, and some would say authoritarian. And I'm like, well, I'm just trying to live according to God's law, um, and not stray from that. But to some, usually who are not involved with the church, they say that's too much. And I said, well, it's never done me wrong. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know anyone whose life has been worse off by straying from God's law. So that's where I thought I just, open up discussion and see if it's something where, because it sounds like you've mentioned about the infighting and the changing hands and doctrines, and this person said this, and then this person declared this at this point in time. And I'm like, well, sadly, most people don't study history um, much past the time they leave school, so they don't really open their minds to learning from what's already been done and or been tried, and they wonder why we keep on ending up creating the same problems over and over and over again, whether it's within the church or life as a whole.
Yeah, well, what I would say, Dan, is that there needs to be basically if there is anything that defines the time that we live in, if there's any word, that word would be confusion, I believe. And why
Mm-hmm.
do I say that is because people have not just lost clarity on what is true and what is wrong, but they've even lost the ability to know what the ability to even like accept truth. So what do I mean by that? We live in kind of now a relativist a philosophical framework and political framework where there is no objective truth, and we can once again set aside the, let's just say, the Protestant versus Catholic debate. What isn't debatable, however, is that Christ is truth, and truth is in the word, and truth is in scripture, and it tells us ultimately how we need to live our lives. And that is what brings a Christian his tranquility. And that's what brings order in his life, because he knows for a fact. And why does he know for a fact how to live and what's good and what is bad? Is that God said so. And I know it's kind of like, it sounds primitive, but like, without that you won't be able to, you can't really build a stable moral society, without realizing, okay, what is truth. And nothing can really substitute the gospel. Nothing can substitute the Bible. Nothing can substitute the truth of Jesus Christ. And we are not even at the point where we accept that that is true. So this is why you heard me at some point say that perhaps the Christian infighting right now isn't as relevant, but that's not to say that I don't believe it, that in Catholicism and Christianity. It's not to say that I don't think that these differences matter. Yes, I do. Yes, I do believe so. But we're not even at the point where we say, okay, actually, Christ is the center of our society. So how so it's just a matter of confusion and really inversion. So you can't, unless we kind of use Christ as an anchor, unless we come back into the fold of Christianity, unless we accept the truths that we've once accepted and taken for granted, we will never stabilize kind of our moral state. We will never achieve salvation. We will never achieve tranquility, and all we'll have instead of a Christian peace, we'll have pacification by Netflix, and pacification by Amazon Prime or whatever, and pacification by McDonald's. you know so that would kind of substitute this kind of, or not substitute, but dull the pain that comes from the soul being eaten, the soul being just torn apart. And why is it being torn apart? Well, because we are apart from Christ, and we just try to kind of binge drink ourselves out of this situation, and it won't happen. It will lead us to death.
I would agree. I think that the demoralization, demotivation, intentional demotivation, or what has been offered to people in order to remove motivation from their being, or the desire to motivate themselves. You could say, um, I would say that the desire to achieve excellence within the individual has been diminished quite a bit, and in many ways within the West, I see it being demonized. Um, and those who want to rise above, you could say, whether it's for purely egotistical reasons or because they do want to contribute to society with the skill sets that they might have or have developed, I believe that there is an intentional demonization of those who can do more and want to do more because they have the ability to do more. And it's that pulling people down who are at the, it's like skimming the cream off the top and then throwing it away. And then all you have left at the bottom is milk. But we all know that cream in some cases is what you need, depending on what you want to make. And, if you, while the cream does naturally separate from the milk, given time, it'll separate from itself and then you can remove it and put it into whatever you need. I think we're throwing it away. Or those who control the narrative today are trying to throw away the cream that has separated the West from the rest of the world in many ways. And you could say the Western Church in many ways has, at based on what I've listened from you and speaking, listening to many videos where E. Michael Jones has been recounting history with the people that it's been interviewing him, the church at many seems, whether it was the Catholic Church, the Orthodox, or etc., was a very much a proponent of beauty and of technology and of creating industry,
Mm-hmm.
and being a supporter of industry, which spread out into the surrounding community. How many people spent their entire lives building a cathedral, or multiple generations, uh, grew up basically, and their trade was cutting stones or creating beauty to to honor God with. And they were compensated for that. It wasn't that they were doing it necessarily for free, but they were doing it because it was something, to do it, out of honor, to do it because is a good thing to do. And now, because we've fallen into the trap of worldly possessions and worldly pursuits first instead of heavenly pursuits. Um, I think that I know for myself, having chosen to, at the beginning of the year, I really decided to say, okay, I'm not going to worry about the money part, with my business. I'm just going to focus on doing what God has put me here to do. And I believe he's put me here to do. And he's taken care of me, and it's removed a lot of the worry, especially with the economy, the way things are and such. It's removed basically all the worry because all I have to do is trust that he's going to provide what I need when I need it. All I have to do is my part in order to fulfill what he's put me here to do.
Yeah, I
But
think
I see
even
a lot of.
though I think even
Go
though
ahead.
you are even though you've said that you're not kind of doctrinally certain that you're studying Christianity at this point and seeing where this leads you, you have at least a remnant or a beginning of what I've just talked about, which is the Christian peace. Yes, the Christian understands that this life is nothing but a speck, is nothing but a tear, a tear, as opposed to the sea of eternity uh, that is heaven or that is hell, right? So people have lost this kind of understanding that, guys, you may live here for 60 or 70 years, but the consequences of the life that you live is going to determine whether or not you are going to spend an eternity, and I mean an eternity, which is just which is impossible to quantify, obviously, but just try to imagine that, without end. And you will spend that period without end, either in the beatific vision, either in the full union with God forever amongst all the saints, or you will spend it burning in hell and and everything that goes along with that. And the Christian understands that, and so he lives his life accordingly. He understands that he doesn't need to necessarily pursue riches for the sake of pursuing riches. He can pursue a profession, he can make money, but in order to do what? Not for the sake of money, but in order to support a family, in order to help the church, in order to help his fellow man. Those are ultimately the goals of a Christian. The goals of a Christian is to live a decent moral life and be rewarded for it. Whereas in the secularist atheistic society, what you've got is there is nothing beyond. So literally, you need to have, as much, you need to alleviate as much suffering. You need to have as much fun at other people's expense as possible, in order to make this life worthwhile. And that is just fundamentally a wrong way to look at things. And I think what you've just said reflects the Christian principle somewhat, in that the belief in God, the belief in something higher, which we all need to start, which we all need to kind of just accept as an axiom, and then go from there. And I want to turn to the chat quickly, and Brian Burrow, hi. Once again, welcome to the stream. Don't remember seeing you, so plenty of new people? Maybe it's just me with my, because I do have a goldfish memory. That's why I have to write all the dates down, because I'm just terrible with memory. But he says Christ is King, which is very true. He says the Catholic work ethic. Well, do you know what? They talk about the Protestant work ethic. They talk about Flanders. They talk about the Low Countries, the Flemish, the Dutch. They talk about the Germans, how they work, and so on, and the Americans and their Protestant work ethic. Ora et labora, which is what Brian, once again, in his concisely pointed out in his other comment, is the basis of medieval Christian society, and is the basis for such a long such a long period of Christian prosperity, from the fall of the Roman Empire to the Renaissance, so the 500s to the 1500s. Ora et labora is is what we need to live by. So this is the understanding that this is the Christian kind of monk Benedictine understanding of valuing labor. So value, as you've pointed out, you mentioned E. Michael Jones, and I take this idea from him because I think it's excellent and describes what's going on very well historically, is that value is derived from labor. Okay, value is not derived from or must not be derived from usury, which is just interest rates, basically. Interest rates have been, as Malcolm Jones points out, basically condemned by all of the philosophers, not just in the West, by the way, but in the East as well. So
I would agree with that there have been other religions throughout the world that have seen usurious tactics as a means of subversion and a means of domination in some ways over societies. It might start small, but the promise of money, and who prints the money, or who coins the money, is kind of who controls it.
Yeah. But I would even say I would take it kind of further and kind of explore what Malcolm Jones means here, is that he's actually kind of a fiatist in a sense. He says that gold really only has real value because the government said so. And in some ways, it is true. I agree with him. So in that sense, he's a bit of a fiat fan, and I think that the reality is behind him. What he really means. Why does usury destroy society? It destroys society because, as opposed to ora et labora, which is pray and work, you have there is this incentive to trick your fellow man, into basically you stealing all his money, into him giving you all the money. It's basically a huge basically a huge racket scheme for oligarchs to get rich, for a thin class of people to get all the economic fruits of labor of everybody else, concentrate them in their hands, and ultimately then have political power. And I don't need to mention by name on stream what small group of people has used that to their advantage very well, and I understand why they've used it to their advantage, because, well, they're not very numerous, and they've been, and for their, let's just say, philosophical outlook, they've been persecuted, and so they need to adopt a system that doesn't require to have a standing army. And that is really how I see it. Like, the usury system is just an alternative to a standing army. It's just a way to politically subvert and take over a territory secretly. And that is ultimately what has been done to Europe and the Catholic Church. And maybe I will push some of you guys in this direction for this reason, to kind of research this a bit. But E. Michael Jones talks about this. The Catholic Church was really is really the only institution in Europe, well, because it's been so dominant in history, that has understood that threat of the people who hate us and the way they're using usury. And really, the church has been the only actor that has, exiled these people and has banned usurious practices. Not perfectly, of course. We can talk about the Renaissance. That's totally fine. But once again, we're talking about ora et labora. We're talking about that medieval period of 1,000 years, of 500 to roughly 1,500, and before the Reformation, where, as Michael Jones says, all of the surplus labor was put into culture, effectively into the monasteries, which were the kind of the cultural landmarks of Europe. They were put into God, the excellent beautiful, expensive missals, the beautiful art, the churches. This all comes from people's labor. And effectively, that is the system that we must recognize, and we must fight to establish, is a system that values labor and doesn't value people taking advantage of others and getting rich as a result, and as a result, getting more political power. Guys, no matter where you are on religion, I can't see that you will disagree with me to say that, or when I say that the system under which we live right now is just not feasible. It's not a system that is created to kind of let's just say, spread the fruits fairly. Spread the fruits of labor fairly. It doesn't free. It's a system, exactly. It's a system of slavery and bondage.
Yeah, exactly. It's designed to depress and compress.
Yes.
From what I can see, it keeps you from fully realizing the full potential that a life with God can give, and the freedom of being unchained financially, where, I'm just speaking from personal experience here, that living in a life where you do not have an allegiance, a financial allegiance, a financial tie to someone else, meaning you're kind of, like the Bible talks about, you are not the borrower's servant to the lender. You are essentially subjugating yourself when you borrow money, especially with usurious practices, compounding interest and things like that. And like where Michael Jones talks about, a fee, like where you have a set interest rate. I personally think that that's a very ethical way of doing it. And I don't necessarily have a problem with with it being say a flat fee.
Well, it is the only way
You
of
know,
doing it, Dan, because, like, we understand we're not like socialist fanatics. We understand that,
oh,
when
of
you
course,
lend money to a person, like, there is risk associated with it, and for that
yes,
time and for that risk, you're supposed to be compensated. We're not against that. So, a
yes,
one-time fee. Let's say you want $1,000, right? You want to borrow $1,000. If I say, okay, I'll lend you $1,000, but you'll give me back 1,100, I think that's totally
yes.
fair. But
I would 100% agree.
what we're against is like, I'm gonna give you $1,000, and then like if you don't pay, and then every single month it's gonna copulate and copulate. It's gonna turn into 1,100 one month, and then 1,355 the next month, and so on, to the
Yes.
point where you will have to sell your house and give me your house in order to pay
Well,
for
and
this loan.
yeah, and similar to how we've discussed in other streams about how, even the medical system in some countries, especially within the United States, bankrupts people, and how other things outside of even the financial system uh, can bankrupt somebody, and that's where I think that the removal of humanity, um, by some, they don't look at people as people. They do not see them as human. They see them as something to be profited from. And uh, while they while they understand that we look the same, you could say we both walk on two legs, we both have two arms for the most part, and we both speak with a tongue. Uh, there are those who see themselves as greater than, simply
Mm-hmm.
because they have a control over a very important thing, which is finance. Um, and because we've become so subjugated, governments have become so subjugated to this group of people who have subverted for hundreds of years, um, financing both sides of wars, time in and time out. And what is it, you know as a whole, we can look at current conflicts going on, and tie that back to historical grudges that have been long standing. And you know money is just kind of money has been weaponized rather than it being something just simply to free trade, between people, um, and can be done ethically, even with profit. I don't think that profit is a bad word, but there's profit, and then there is, um, what's the other word I'm looking for? Uh, yeah, there's profit, and then there's just extreme excessive profit, I guess. Where you're really just taking advantage of somebody, especially when it's something that they do need, and whether it's food or resources, or and you're
Yeah,
using it and you're
there's profit,
weaponizing
and
it.
then there's like extortion,
That's the
basically.
word I was looking for, extortion. Yes, where you're kind of holding it over somebody's head. It's when someone is, when you see somebody who is hungry, and then you want to be able to take advantage of that situation, saying, well, okay, I want this from you. In a Christian moral society that is based in Christian ethics, um, that would not be tolerated. But despite us supposedly living in a culture that supposedly has its basis in Christian morality, we're far from it. And I'd say we're actually closer to what would be the um, ethics prescribed in other religious texts that have been
Mm-hmm.
adopted by smaller groups. It's like it's the opposite. What the Bible says, the the T book refutes and almost goes against it entirely. It permits, and
Yeah.
the church, we're all human. We all are, fallible. Some more than others, but you know, the church is not immune. And if anything, I think, like it talks about, in the end times, the be aware of false preachers, and
Yeah.
look at those who are pursuing worldly things first. How many Gulfstream jets does a pastor need? to preach the kingdom of God.
It's so funny
How
that you
many?
mentioned this, Dan, because I literally recently seen a documentary on the mega churches in America. It's such like a, I was fascinated with it because it's such an alien concept to me. I come from like a tradition where you have priests, and you have the clergymen, the hierarchy, who are supposed to live modestly. They're supposed to be monk-like. They live in a they go to a seminary for years, right? They must be they take vows of poverty and so on. And they dress appropriately. And then I just see this like um this pen salesman Christianity, as I call it, in the mega churches. It's insane. I don't really understand what kind of people go and listen to this like prosperity gospel nonsense, and listen to how these so-called pastors, or whatever they call themselves, buying mansions and planes and so on. How do people, is that just 70 IQ? Farming is basically like farming pseudo disabled people. Is that what they're doing, exploiting pseudo disabled people?
Well, my without getting personal here, I've had some family members who have had troubled upbringings,
Yeah.
um, and that has led to an internal conflict with usually feelings of inadequacy.
Yeah.
And sometimes you could say there's, I think, upbringings. There's a generational um, component, I believe, to with the prosperity doctrine becoming very popular. Um, when you look at like the Great Depression, the financial woes of the West in the early 20th century, the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, maybe even going into the 50s. The post-World War II rebuilding era in Europe, the spread of communism, Bolshevism, etc., into Eastern Europe, um, and how people were kind of downtrodden. Um, they saw the excesses that were being uh, you know realized by some, and they kind of got greedy, and they you know and I'm not saying that excess is necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that excess is kind of you're it's kind of like with the Israelites, or the Hebrews when they're in the desert, and God says, do not eat more. Once you're hungry, stop eating.
Yeah.
And do not save, for the next day. And it was kind of it's an exercise in trust, that trusting that God is going to provide. And I think that, um, based on what I've seen with some family members, the reason why that prosperity doctrine of God will provide is because their their own internal conflicts were being manifested in words that sounded good.
Mm-hmm.
They're the growing up with parents who had lived, like my grandparents who lived through the Great Depression, my grandmother who was very much impacted by seeing um, her father out of work, and even up until the time that she died, she was very much, not a hoarder, but she was a penny pincher. She was very, very frugal, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being frugal, but there's being frugal, and then there's being cheap. And I think there's a part of that rubbed off onto that family member of mine, um, and has while I've addressed this, at a concern, um, having seen them written $1,000 check by seeing a late night infomercial on, TBN Christian Broadcasting, and then this is when $1,000 check to an organization that they've never had personal connection with. They just saw it on the TV, but send $1,000 check and we'll send you, and we'll pray a blessing for you.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, snake oil salesman, snake
Yeah.
oil salesman. And how many other people have, potentially millions, tens of millions maybe, have been snookered. by this over the years, whether it's radio broadcasting or television broadcasting or flyers and pamphlets. And I think there's a point when you have to say, maybe it's just lack of street smarts. They grew up in a high trust society where they didn't have to worry about things like those of us who are younger do now, and we've been able to see what has happened and what has transpired with subversion tactics being used to undermine once high trust societies where you could walk down the street at any time of the day and you did not have to worry about being accosted, um, or or your country's integrity simply being challenged, from foreign groups. And I think that now there's just, I think it just, going back to the roots, sorry for the rambling, but I do think that it starts with a um, a desire to have to have what your neighbor has. I think it goes back to that. Thou shalt not covet. You know, do not covet thy neighbor's wife. Do not, um, you know, I mean, it's rooted in sin, I believe, but you're not trusting that God is going to provide what you need, which includes skills, but it's also trusting that God has your best interest in mind, and that He's not going to fail you if you trust Him. So that's where that's just, sorry for I don't have any notes to go by, so I'm just thinking this off the top.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you, and for sure that this is just all a part of the demoralization. At some point, it's people become so desperate, people become so disillusioned that they will cling to anything, to anything that promises you salvation. But as we know, in the end, guys, only the salvation is in Christ. The salvation is not in is not in the salesman, pastor. It's not in the synagogue. It's not in, it's not in the mosque. It's not in the Buddhist temple. It's only with Christ. Only with Christ can you be saved. It's as simple as that. He is the truth. He is the word. And if you follow him, if you believe in him, if you believe in his church, that's the only way to be saved. And unfortunately, this has totally been substituted, as I've discussed. But well, Dan, it was very nice having you. Thanks for calling in. You were the very first caller.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so
much.
much.
Just add one? Can I
Absolutely.
just add one
Go
thing
for it.
real quick? Just for anyone who is listening, but something that came to mind. Reminding ourselves that what is the earthly will go away, from dust to dust. The things of this world, will go away, and they will not last, and that includes gold. And I know a lot of people talk about gold. I've personally, my outlook on money and finances, that similar to Mr. Jones, is that labor is what is the basis of value, and is the best way to recognize value. Not in all cases, but I think it's a very good baseline. Uh, kind of like what he talks about with barren metal. You can put 2 gold coins in a drawer, and you come back and you only have 2 gold coins. Whereas if you put wheat in the ground, and a crop springs up, and then you glean that, and then you make flour, and now you have bread. You have translated value, have expanded value based on the effort and the time that has been put into that. And when I look at what's going on now with between Russia and the West, I see Russia with a lot of resources that they don't need anyone else. They're very self-sufficient with what they have within their own borders. However, Europe is very much in need of what Russia has. So by doing what they're doing, You know, it's I think they're poking a bear that doesn't want to bite them, and I think in some ways cares about them, because it's not just a financial care. It's also a, you know, we are in many ways the same people,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but you still have the political divide, or the border divide there, you know, between different states. And I think I see it as an interesting reality of, well, who's going to go hungry first? And I don't think it's going to be Russia, um,
Yeah, well,
because
Russia,
I think,
the situation is that Russia has the fundamentals. Russia is very reliant on the West, on like consumer goods, for example, like, or like clothes and cars and stuff like that. But like when it comes to, let's say, the end of the world scenario, like apocalypse scenario, um, I mean, Russia has ultimately what do you need to survive? You need food, and you need to be kept warm, and that's what Russia
mm-hmm.
provides ultimately. That's it.
And they've got endless amounts of both.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Well, exactly.
well,
Yep.
thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, for coming on. Thank you so much, and
All right.
hope that you'll come on on future live streams as well. You're always welcome.
I look forward to that. Thank you for the
Thanks, Dan.
invitation. All right.
Ooh, all right. Uh, Going back to the chat. Thank you very much, Dan, once again for coming on to. If anyone else wants to come, this is the thing, guys. I wanted to sort out the StreamYard, but there seems to be some kind of an echo thing going on. I'll sort out the calling the callings later on. This is kind of, you've been my guinea pigs. How does it feel like to be guinea pigs for a new streamer? Does it feel good? I bet it feels great. But yeah, as I've written down on the screen, remember to follow the Telegram link. A lot of you may have already come from there, but in case you haven't, Telegram link. I post updates almost daily. Just my thoughts on historic events, on religion, etc. Going back to the chat, Trevor asks, you'll probably get into this in the future streams, but what relevance does the Western Schism have to us today? Why is it important? Well, yeah, precisely. Well, I've kind of already touched upon it. You've probably come a bit late, but effectively what we have, the reason why it's so important is that during the Western Schism, it was basically chaos within the church. Theological uncertainty, false claimants to the papacy, moral decadence, so if this doesn't describe, oops, okay, if this doesn't describe to you today, I don't think what will. I think this is exactly the kind of situation that we're living in right now. I don't want to get too deep into it, but we have chaos in the church for sure. We have all these different people who are calling each other schismatics. We have theological uncertainty within the church. People don't know whether you need to be, the majority of so-called Catholics will tell you don't need to be in the church to be saved. You don't need to be even Christian to be saved. This is kind of the insanity of current theology within the church. You have then people who, once again, as I've described, don't care about sins like homosexuality. They openly support it. They openly support abortion. They support women in positions of clergy. It's absolute insanity. And also people believe that believe in this like Protestant idea that you don't really need to cooperate with God to be saved, which that you just need to believe and say sorry to God every once in a while and then you'll be saved. And that leads to a world where, well, once again, there isn't really much that holds you back at that point. you know, because your actions at that point don't really matter very much. We have false popes, as you know, that I hold that ever since the Second Vatican Council, we've had false popes. So Francis, in my opinion, is an anti-pope, is a false claimant to the papacy, due to the fact that he's a heretic. And then we've got moral decadence, which is on its face. I've already mentioned homosexuality being the pride, basically pride parades. Pride parades. Oh, it's a bit. Pride parade. Let me do this as well, right? Pride parades. Pride parades are kind of an or a perfect exemplar of what's wrong with our society. Trevor then says, I agree, however, we're not coming from the Catholic base we had at that time. We're coming from an entirely secularized society. Well, you know, the reason why we don't have that base anymore is because, you know, it was removed. And it wasn't removed forever, hopefully. You know, we can kind of still form a counter current to what's happening. We can hope for a return to Christianity. I'm not going to abandon Christianity. It's never going to happen because, as I said, Jesus Christ is the truth, and he established a church, and I believe in that. It's as simple as. Leonardo says, I have no questions, actually. Congratulations for the live stream. Well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. All guys, if I can ask you, drop 1 in the chat if you enjoyed the stream, and 2 in the chat if you didn't enjoy the stream. And let's see how many people enjoyed it and how many people didn't. Let's just hope the majority did, because I really went off the cuff. I lost my notes, as you already know, and it was just... It was crazy, but hopefully that that kind of improv history outline was sufficient for us to kind of establish the stage for the schism, what has happened. All right, I'm seeing a lot of ones. Excellent. So I'm not sure if the next stream is going to be like the continuation on the schism. We'll see. Maybe I'll kind of have like parallel historical streams going, or church streams. I might do some apologetic streams. So like approaching from the Catholic perspective, you know, from the Christian perspective in general. I don't know if you guys would like me to do apologetic streams, because I did remember, I think most of you would have voted in the poll that I did in the Telegram channel, which is another reason why you should subscribe, because I do polls, which, you know, directly influences the kind of content I put out. So I did the poll, and the vast majority of you have said that you like the religious content. So there's definitely more religious content coming your way, and as usual, you know, history and religion, they kind of, it's all really politics, history, religion. It's all a part of really one thing. And I don't know if you've heard, but Bishop Williamson, who's on my who was on Friends of Aquinas a couple of months back. If you haven't seen it, you should really go and watch that. Fascinating interview. But he says that basically all wars are religious wars, and I tend to agree with him. Directly or indirectly, they're religious wars. I tend to agree with him, and therefore religion and politics are really inseparable. And so to the people who say, why are you talking so much about religion? Why, you know, stop talking about religion, talk about politics instead. Actually, no, because religion has a direct influence on politics, on the way we behave as human beings in a society. And if we don't have a strict moral code, if we don't have a moral guideline, then we'll become a decadent society, and that's ultimately what has happened. And now, to end the stream, I want to make kind of a, you know, a little maybe sneak peek of an announcement, not like a definite announcement, but a sneak peek. As you know, I've had a successful interview recently on the channel with Dr. E. Michael Jones, whom a lot of people have enjoyed listening to. He's definitely a fascinating a fascinating character, to say the least. And I've also, as I've just mentioned, had a interview with Bishop Williamson. And if you had listened to the interview I did with E. Michael Jones, he has like some personal history with Bishop Williamson, and they are really perhaps maybe on the opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to the current crisis within the church. And E. Michael Jones has asked me to arrange a joint interview between E. Michael Jones and Bishop Williamson. So hopefully in a week or so, you're going to see this live joint interview. Dr. E. Michael Jones and Bishop Williamson together discussing what has happened to Christianity, what has happened to society, discussing the history of it. It's going to be, I'm sure it's going to be an absolute banger and an amazing show. So with that positive note, I leave you. I thank everyone for joining. I thank everyone for watching, and have a blessed day.